Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. A full day of war criming by Russian President Vladimir Putin, and lots of videos to pay attention to. In fact, spent the whole day today, I think like most of the globe, looking at the war criming going on in real time. Everyone has seen the tank that ran over the civilian guy, the guy in the car, which miraculously somehow it's being reported that that person survived having a tank roll over the car and then back up over it. Surprisingly, that person survived. There have just been a bunch of things that are, where do you begin? I know where our right-wing friends begin. I know where the Republican Party, I'm not going to say all, I'm going to say a good number in the Republican Party. And this could be a moment of epiphany, a wake-up call for a lot of people who still pull the lever for the grand old party, and realizing that they ain't the party of Reagan anymore. This is not the party of Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. This is the party of Vladimir Putin's savvy and a genius. And oh my gosh, I'm just so enamored. The party of the guy who in Helsinki wore the dog collar. I'm hoping this is that moment, that there is some moment of clarity where people are paying attention to what's going on down in Crazy Pack as they are doing everything imaginable to attack the president. And on the brink of World War III. I mean, I don't know how else to put this. We are in a moment of global peril. And still, in this moment, and still, at this time, they decide now is the time to continue their divisiveness. Now is the time to continue their attack and projection of their perceived weakness of our commander-in-chief. It's twisted, it's bizarre, but it makes you kind of wonder. Makes you kind of wonder where these right-wing groups have been getting their money for a very long time. It makes you wonder how deeply burrowed into the GOP and the NRA and CPAC and all of these other right-wing groups, just how deeply burrowed that oligarchy money is. How much Russian money is going through the bloods of the good old American GOP. Kind of got to wonder, don't you? Because if you're watching fake propaganda on that Fox channel, if you're watching any of the other cable news who love to talk about freedom, love to talk about liberty in America, go after the black guy for kneeling, for flying the flag, and yet, in a moment where we are on the brink of World War III, they are attacking viciously the President of the United States. Never thought I'd see it. Look, I at no point liked Ronald Reagan while he was president. Wasn't fond of George H.W. Bush. Wasn't fond of W at all. But at no point did I ever go, gee, I hope he fails. And I want to project weakness. I want the world to think these guys are dithering idiots. And look, W was. We're in an interesting moment. We're in an interesting moment in this country, and this is where the silent majority, the people who have stayed out of it, the people who have not weighed in yet, have to come and wake up. Understand, the Fox channel, the OAN people, their numbers aren't indicative of the country. Fox News gets about 2 million, 2.3 million viewers a night. That's it. You're talking in a country of 350 million. Their messaging, their agenda, what they put out is just regurgitated throughout our mainstream media and throughout the corporate controlled media. Why? Well, to keep people divided. This is not that moment. And I'd love to hear your thoughts today. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. What did you do today? What did you watch today? What did you see? I saw the UN, the Security Council, draft a resolution that was voted on today by the Security Council, and Russia vetoed it. And you go, well, of course they're going to veto it. And are you surprised? What I am surprised at is that China abstained. That was an important moment. And this, again, I give credit to Joe Biden, and I believe that this is them working the back channels. This is them, working that diplomacy. Now, 11 other council members voted in favor of it. Now the draft resolution will be taken up, I'm assuming, by the 193-member UN General Assembly. We'll see where that goes. Again, these are formalities. These are things that happen. Today, however, history was made. This is the first time NATO has ever called up its response force. The first time the NATO response force has ever been activated as a defense measure. This is pretty amazing. And look, NATO has never been used as an offensive anything. They've been used as peacekeepers to go in and kind of just, hey, stop, everybody stop. This could be historic. And look, to my point, there was a poll done by Gallup. 52% see the conflict between Russia and the Ukraine as critical to the U.S. I'm surprised this early that it's that high, especially with all the dividing and all the division, especially with the political winds that have been blowing. Now you got the president who has come out and said, look, we need some money for this. He's asked for $6.4 billion in humanitarian and defense aid for Ukraine. It'll be interesting to see how long it takes to get this through. This will show me in a moment where the Republican Party really is. And now we know there are going to be people who are against it. We know that. There are going to be some. But who will be the people who step forward? Who will be the Republicans who will step up and say, we're gonna move on this? Because again, all we saw today, coming out of Ukraine, and I said this yesterday, this is going to be one of those moments where the war crimes are going to be in real time. This will be the most recorded war in history because everyone's got a cell phone. And I'll tell you, I have the utmost respect for the president of Ukraine. I mean, stop and think about this guy. He comes into office. He's a comedian. Literally, he wins an election as a comedian. It's almost a joke. It sounds like a nightclub punchline. And almost immediately, he's put on the spot by the most powerful man in the free world. Donald Trump has his perfect conversation where he is basically strong-arming this guy who's just trying to figure out where the bathroom is at this point. And you've got the U.S. president strong-arming this guy to dig up dirt on his political opponent. And if he doesn't do it, if he doesn't do what the U.S. president wants him to do, basically the person that holds his security and his life in his hands, and he doesn't do it, he doesn't go dig up the dirt because there's nothing to be dug up. And he's sold, well, if you don't get us what we want, you're not going to get what you want. Knowing that the Russians were banging on his door. Remember that. Remember that first impeachment. Because that's what that was about. It was about, the Russians have been wanting to do this for the longest time. And they were building up. And look, Zelensky knew he needed that aid. Needed those weapons. And Trump was trying to hold him hostage. Think about the courage this guy had to stand up to Trump and say no. And now the fact that he has not left Ukraine, he's still there putting out videos saying, look, they're coming to the Capitol. And they will probably capture and execute him. And he's got to know that. So here's a guy, a comedian, who has stood up to the two most powerful people on this planet who could end humanity. Think about that for a second. Speaking of courage, the story's been floating around about the Ukrainian soldiers in the Black Sea on this Snake Island. And again, you put yourself in this situation, what do? You got a Russian warship coming up upon you saying, surrender or we're going to annihilate you on your little island. And the island doesn't look much bigger than a couple of football fields. Not much place to run. And they tell them to go blank themselves. And then you're summarily executed. Courage. The mayor of Kiev, former boxer Klitschko. Iconic photo today of him carrying around a weapon to defend his city. And we've got people here who are, oh, look at how bad they treat those truckers up in Canada. Look at how bad they are after 3 weeks. And yet we look in Russia where the police are, day one, locking people up. It's kind of amazing to me that there's this disconnect. And I think people want to think, I think they want to believe how things should be as opposed to how they are. I had someone go, well, what's the big deal about Ukraine? The reality is, without Ukraine, Russia cannot be an empire. You cannot have a Russian empire without Ukraine. Can't have it. I'm no expert, by any stretch, but it looks like the big piece. You can't get the old gang back together unless you get the giant centerpiece. And the thing is, this has been coming. And for all of the people who are blaming Joe Biden, this isn't Joe Biden's fault. This is Vladimir Putin's fault. And every person who says, oh, this is Biden's fault, it's just because no. This is Putin's fault. He wanted to do this. The only reason that he didn't do it during Trump's watch, and I had a bunch of people say, well, they'd have never done this under Trump's watch. You're probably right. Because he was getting everything he wanted under Trump's watch. He had Trump in his pocket. Trump was his little pet toy. Manipulated. Let him believe he was the strong man. Let him believe he was smart. Let him believe all that stuff. Which is why I go back to that Helsinki meeting. Why are there no notes? Why were the notes taken away? Why would Trump not allow those notes? I mean, he's been in a whole bunch of other meetings, all kinds of meetings. Translators there, always notes. Why that one? And, a lot of people think it's, because, he gave away things or, it was about, maybe a hotel deal or who knows what. I think it's because he was made to look and feel stupid and was bullied over. Because you look at him when he came out for that press conference, he looked like a bullied, broken man. And look, I understand bullies. Like I said, I'm not the brightest guy in the box, but I grew up on the streets dealing with bullies. I understand them. And you have to stand up to the bullies. And this is what the folks in Ukraine are doing, and good on them. The stories, the pictures are horrible of them bombing these cities. And no matter what happens, and as I said yesterday, no matter what happens out of this, the poor and the working class are going to suffer unimaginably for the next decade, probably more. And not just in Ukraine, but in Russia as well. They're talking about stagflation in Ukraine. They're talking about already, even if it stops today. So that wasn't enough that Vlad went into Ukraine. There's also talk if Finland or Sweden, if they try to join NATO, there will be, according to Russia, military and political consequences against Finland and Sweden. This is a guy who, look, you're taking a stand. Now, what I had today, I had people going, well, what we should do, Rick, understand. This is all about NATO's expansion and Vladimir Putin being angry. And I go, okay, yeah. If I'm Ukraine, I want protection from the rest of the world from this bully. Maybe stop bullying me, and maybe we can talk about not having this. But I had someone go, well, what we should do is we should just stop all talk of NATO expansion. And I go, we used to remember when appeasement didn't work, when giving into bullies doesn't work. We know that giving into bullies never works. Appeasement does not work. And yet, that's all I heard today. Oh, we should negotiate. Negotiate with what? This is the Ukrainian people doing this. Now, claims coming out of Ukraine that, and if this is true, this is potentially the end of Putin. The Financial Times is reporting that Ukraine is claiming that they have killed almost 3,000 Russian soldiers in just 36 hours. If that is true, that could be a game changer, because the Russian people I don't think are going to stand for that. Understand. Think about how we went crazy here in this country. Over 20 years in Iraq, we lost 4,431 soldiers. And people were ready to lose their minds, as we should. They lost 3,000 in 36 hours, according to this report. You kind of gotta go, did Putin overplay his hands? Potentially, we'll see. Now, the first thing that Putin did, and I'm not surprised, is they started limiting Facebook, which I find kind of ironic, since Putin was one of the masters, him and his troll army, at getting the former guy elected by using Facebook. Shows he understands the power of it. Shows he understands the power of that kind of communication. Now, Nikki Haley came out in her genius. She said that Joe Biden should demand that Russia is expelled from the UN Human Rights Council. Okay, what's that going to do? They should be expelled, yeah, but it shouldn't be Joe Biden doing that. That should be one of the countries in the area. It should be someone else doing that. We've got bigger things to do, like keep the coalition together. And this is what's frustrating to me, because, we got one commander-in-chief. He's making the decisions. And yet in real time, throughout the day, what you've got Fox, the Fox channel, you've got OAN, you've got Newsmax, you've got all these cable outlets, you've got a massive digital, a digital campaign against Biden. You've got all of talk radio. You've got all of this rowing in the same direction. Attack Joe Biden. Again, what message does that send globally? What does it send to Putin? Or is it, you know what it sends to Putin? It gives him fodder to put on his propaganda channels. Because we find out that the Fox channel, they're big names like Hannity and Carlson. They're literally transcribing those and putting them on Russian state television to show how weak we are. It is where we are. Now, what's even more interesting, today the president came out and nominated someone for Supreme Court. Ketanji Brown Jackson is her name. She has been a federal appeals court on the court, I guess, last year she got there. She's had a long career. She's a younger woman. She's been through a whole bunch of stuff, got a bunch of experience. And look, much in the vein that Trump did, went for a younger person. Republicans are losing their minds. Marsha Blackburn, basically losing her mind, saying, how can you, the timing of this is bad. It's just bad. You got everything going on. The president announced just days after an unprovoked full-scale invasion by Russia. It's extremely inappropriate, she says. No, it's not inappropriate. It's getting the work done. It's being able to walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. It's being able to focus on a couple of things at once and still running our country while we're saving the world. Something that maybe Marsha could be concerned about. Now, here's the thing. Do I think Biden's choice is going to get a Republican vote? Of course not. I don't expect Marsha to vote for anyone that Joe Biden puts forth. In fact, there are only a handful of Republicans who may have even considered to vote for a Republican or a Joe Biden nominee. Because last year, when Brown was confirmed for the federal bench that she's on now, there were 3 Republicans that voted for her. There was Lindsey Graham, surprisingly, and he's already come out and said, no, not going to do it. No. He got too much trouble the last time. Susan Collins of Maine, who's like, I don't want to get involved in a short schedule. And Lisa Murkowski, who has evidently told the Washington Post that, well, this could be a different vote. So this could be, let this work itself out for you. The reason why this nomination has to go forward quickly is if Joe Manchin decides that he's going to derail this nominee, we then end up in the summer before you get another one, maybe closer to the fall. The election happens. What happens if Democrats lose the Senate? Biden loses a Supreme Court seat. This is what the Republicans are planning on. This is what they're stalling for. This is why they're making such a big deal out of, now's not the time. You should wait. It's inappropriate. It's perfectly appropriate. These wheels were in place, and we're moving in this direction for a long time. It's time to get it done. But again, the chaos merchants, the control meisters, they see it as an opportunity possibly. If you can push this off, if they can derail her nomination, they can derail that confirmation and end up having to go through this again. There's a possibility of getting someone, more palatable to their right-wing fringe ideology, or just being able to outwardly steal it. Yeah, that's where we are. So internationally, we were watching criming by a dictator, and domestically, we're watching justifications and appeasement from about 30% of the country. Scary times. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Have you seen these messages? Have you gotten them? Have you gotten these emails from all of these right-wing groups? By all means, send them along. I love to see the rhetoric. rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of the program thus far, the podcast, make sure you grab that anywhere where you get your podcasts, from iHeart to iTunes, Podbean to Stitcher, and everywhere in between. You can grab that stuff. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, our Russia expert, Olga Lautman, going to be here to share some thoughts on what's happening on the ground and maybe what we can expect over the next couple of days. Quick break. Right back with Olga Lautman. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1913. That was the day some 24,000 workers in Paterson, New Jersey, walked out of 300 silk mills and dye houses to demand the 8-hour day, better working conditions, and a return to the 2-loom system. Mill owners attempted to introduce a reduction of the workforce by doubling the number of looms workers ran from 2 to 4. Descendants of strikers recalled a 55-hour work week and children as young as 9 working in the mills. The strike started in late January at Doherty Mills and soon spread to become a general strike. Leaders from the industrial workers of the world like Big Bill Haywood, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, and Carlo Tresca organized rallies, strike support, and food pantries for the silk workers. The police routinely attacked picket lines, and as many as 1,850 workers were arrested during the course of the strike. Socialists like John Reed put on a massive public pageant at New York City's Madison Square Garden that reenacted the strike to raise strike relief funds. 35,000 turned out to hear Upton Sinclair address the strikers. Having stockpiled surplus product, manufacturers were able to outlast workers who by July were practically starving. A main cause of the strike's failure was the introduction of labor-saving technology that served to reduce the need for highly skilled workers and drive down wages. The strike may have failed in many of its demands, but silk workers were able to beat back the implementation of the four-loom system for almost a decade. They would finally win the 8-hour day in 1919. Importantly, the strike succeeded in uniting male and female workers across ethnic and craft lines. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
In 1972, I was part of a nationwide campaign that came close to getting the U.S. Senate to reject Earl Butz, Richard Nixon's choice for Secretary of Agriculture. A coalition of grassroots farmers, consumers, and public interest organizations teamed up with progressive senators to undertake the almost impossible challenge of defeating the cabinet nominee. The 51 to 44 Senate vote was so close because we were able to expose Butz as Bud Ugly. We brought the abusive power of corporate agribusiness into the public consciousness for the first time. We had won a moral victory, but it turned out to be a curse and a blessing. First, the curse. Butz had risen to prominence in the world of agriculture by devoting himself to the corporate takeover of the global food economy. He openly promoted the preeminence of middlemen food manufacturers over family farmers. Agriculture is no longer a way of life, he barked. It's a business. He instructed farmers to get big or get out, and proceeded to shove tens of thousands of them out by promoting an export-based, corporate-run food economy. Adapt, he warned, or die. The ruination of farms and rural communities, Butz added, releases people to do something useful in our society. This is Jim Hightower saying, the curse of Butz, however, spun off a blessing. Small farmers and food artisans practically threw up at the resulting Twinkie-ization of America's food. They were sickened that nature's own contribution to human culture was being turned into another plasticized product of corporate profiteers. They threw themselves into creating and sustaining a viable alternative, linking locally with consumers, environmentalists, community activists, marketers, and others. The Good Food Rebellion has since sprouted, spread, and blossomed from coast to coast. To find farmers markets and other expressions of this movement right where you live, go to localharvest.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So a friend messaged me today and said, hey, I'm hearing on the ground that Russian soldiers are breaking into people's homes, desperately seeking food and dry clothing, and actually, in violation of the Geneva Convention, wearing civilian clothes without any markings. This, again, like I said, it's a full day of war criming going on right before our very eyes. But this is one of those things where you go, I'm not surprised by the situation that they're in. Was now the right time to go invading Ukraine? You got to wonder. And here to share some thoughts on what's going on the ground and maybe share some thoughts on where we're heading. I've asked Olga Lautman to come talk with us. She's an expert researcher on Russia and Ukraine. Her website, olgalautman.com. We'll get links out on social media. I can check out the work that she does. Olga, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you.
So, let's start. I know this is your home country. This is where you know people there. You've got friends, family, all that. What are you hearing from the people on the ground? Not in the news media, not what's on Twitter. What are you hearing from folks that you know?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a lot more panic, but there's also this, nationalism again coming up, that people are willing to fight for their country. They're going today. They opened the weapons depot. They went and into to get weapons, and they will. They are realizing that at first it was shock the past few days. I think we're all so shocked, but now it's anger because it's like their whole world got upside down, turned upside down, but no absolute reason. And to see, these beautiful cities being bombed, and just, when Russia gets involved, they don't even have targets. They just like indiscriminately start bombing and commit, like you said, war crimes. We saw it in Syria, what they were doing, targeting schools, targeting hospitals. And now we're seeing it play out, except here, because it's Ukraine, people are focusing on it. And now, because it's Europe, and this potentially can be a bigger conflict in Europe, and they're seeing literally minute by minute plays of everything happening.
Yeah, the big thing that made its rounds around Twitter today was the tank, the guy driving the tank down a public road, and just cross 3 lanes of traffic to run over a civilian vehicle and then back over it again. Miraculously, from what I understand, that person actually survived. No idea how, but it's that kind of criming, and we're in a moment where technology lets us see this stuff in real time. Which is why I hope that the international community rises up and is angry and holds these people accountable.
Yeah, because look, we've talked about this before. I think on the same topic of when Russia was building up their troops along Ukraine's border. And look, we post World War II, we have an international order and international laws, and you cannot allow a country to just walk in and invade just because they feel like it. I mean, if we do this with Russia and allow them to take Ukraine and Belarus and Moldova and whatever else they want, what's going to prevent China from going and doing this? And any country who will look at their neighbor and say, you know what, I like what they have, and take them, or you know what, I don't like them, so I'm going to go take out their leadership and put our leadership in. I mean, we have international norms for a reason, and Putin has really overstepped his boundaries this time.
Yeah, no, I went back and I looked at the map of the region, and I know Ukraine is a large country, large population, some 45 million people, I believe. It's an enormous country, and I'm going, what's the plan here? Okay, you're going to come in, you're going to put in a shadow puppet government, maybe. How are you going to control this enormous country? How are you going to control the people who clearly, you look at some of the images coming out, the guy who's the mayor, the former boxer Klitschko, you've got Zelensky, who, I got to tell you, from comedian to a guy who stood up to the 2 most powerful people on the planet, nothing but respect for him. But all the Ukrainian people thus far, those 13 on the island, all this stuff. How do you defend that once you've quote unquote won?
They're not. Even if Russia takes Ukraine, first of all, Russia tried to take Ukraine in 2014 with their puppet government there. Ukrainians came to the streets and chased him out, and Yanukovych has been living since in Russia under security service protection. They're planning to put his people right back. So even if they manage to topple the government and they manage to, come in, they're not going to be able to hold it, because Ukrainians, first of all, Ukrainians have their own history. They want nothing to do with Russia. They have been moving away from Russia for a long time. They are more pro-Western and have democracy and have normal journalists who investigate things and are not thrown out of windows. So, I mean, this is, they're not going to go back to Russia. So even if Russia takes Kiev tonight, I mean, one by one, when things calm down, Ukrainians will take their land back. And in the process, they will fight as hard as they can to keep their land, because it's their land, with or without U.S. support, European support. I mean, they can use our weapons or they'll use broomsticks, but they will fight for their land.
You know, here's the thing. All day today, I heard people saying, "Olga, that well, you know, we need to appease Putin. We won't
No.
let Ukraine into NATO. You know, that's off the table. Just stop. You know, we'll go after because evidently I'm led to believe there are Nazis within the Ukrainian government. That the Jewish leader of the country is, you know, got a bunch of Nazis running around. This is the story that we're being sold. Is that true?
No, no. I mean, Russia, and that's the thing, because there's so much focus, and this is how you beat disinformation, by putting light on it. And whereas Russia before would win with their disinformation, you know, over the years, I mean, they've used this Nazi story before Zelensky. I mean, this is something that they've started in 2014, 15, but nobody was paying attention. Now everyone is monitoring them, but most importantly, everyone is united. I mean, even here, you have Republicans and Democrats united. You have most of Americans behind Ukraine. I mean, the scenes are incredible. You know, seeing a country just start bombing another country for absolutely no reason, no provocation. And you have Europe united. So, I mean, now people see this nonsense that Putin, you know, puts out, and or his propaganda machine. They're like, what are you talking about? A Jewish president with Nazis? I mean, that doesn't even make sense, you know? So, no, it's, but now people are seeing it, and people are finally waking up at the sake of Ukrainians, are waking up to see all of Russia's dirty tactics. They did the same thing in Georgia. They did the same thing in Syria, Chechnya. I mean, this is something they've done over and over and over, but people just didn't pay mind. But now that the full focus is on Ukraine, people see what's happening.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show with Olga Lautman. Olga is an expert researcher on Russia and Ukraine. You can check out the work that she does over at olgalautman.com. We'll get links out on social media. If you got a question, thought, comment, something you want to ask Olga, give us a yell, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. If you're just joining us, make sure you grab the podcast anywhere where you get your podcasts, from iHeart to iTunes and all the other places in between. You can get it there. Now, Olga, you know, I'm looking at this and going, okay, now if I'm Vlad, I've said from the beginning, I believe it's about the legacy of getting the old gang back together. We want to recreate the Soviet Union. He's a former KGB guy who was, you know, not I can't imagine thrilled by the fall of the Soviet Union and the breakup of the whole empire. That's got to be my mindset, but he says no, that's not it. I'm being assured by my, you know, Fox News and, you know, the right-wing radical folks, no, that's not it. He just wants safety and security. He's afraid that, you know, NATO will be invading, which has never happened. What is the ultimate plan, do you think? Is it closer to what I think? It's about getting the old band back together, or what? What do you think?
First of all, NATO was BS. I mean, Putin contrived this fear of NATO suddenly in November. Ukraine isn't any closer to joining NATO now than it was last year, than the year before. Ukraine still has ways to go, and probably by the time they get into NATO, Putin will be on the other side and you know, done. So I mean, this is not about NATO. This is about Putin leaving his legacy. And we've talked about this before. He is almost 70 years old. He has absolutely nothing to show for 20 years of rule. He is one of the richest people, but everything is hidden, and we're soon going to find out, now that everything is being sanctioned, of exactly how he's hidden his money, through what companies. And he does want to reinstate the Soviet Union. He wants to reinstate the territory, maybe not directly as its own territory, but to have like a satellite state, like he did, you know, during the Cold War, without having during the Soviet Union, without having to feed, you know, the people there. So, and it's not about Ukraine, because it's Ukraine now. First of all, it's a military strategy. He took Belarus. He completed Belarus in December. Now he's moving on to Ukraine. I know for years they've been discussing taking Moldova and Lithuania, and the Slovakia corridor that connects, you know, Kaliningrad to Belarus. Now, once we get to Lithuania, that is NATO, you know, and this is where he's going. He wants to cut a huge swath, put it under his control. It has nothing to do with security because Putin invaded Ukraine, invaded Georgia, well, he didn't, but Russia invaded Moldova. When has Ukraine stepped even an inch onto Russian soil? They haven't even looked over there. Everybody's trying to move forward, and he's still stuck in, World War II. And with the Nazi thing, the day he launched a war, that whole day, they played on Russian TV Soviet II Nazi movies all day long. And then, sure enough, he comes, gives his unhinged speech, says he's ordering an operation to denazify Ukraine. So, I mean, he's stuck in World War II. That's the only thing that I think this Russia accomplished since then, at least in their mind.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now, we talked a little bit about what's going on in Ukraine and the people on the ground. What about the people in Russia? We're seeing some protests. There were a bunch of people arrested today. What seems to be the sentiment that you understand it to be from just the average everyday working class folks there? Because I said, look, at the end of the day, it's the poor and the working class who are going to suffer in all of this on both sides of the border in Ukraine and in Russia and here too, but to a much, much lesser extent. So what do you think? What's the sentiment that as you're hearing it?
Well, let's start from the top because I saw something that I've never seen in Russia before. The head of one of the intelligence agencies on Monday during the National Security Council was so nervous, and this is a head of an intelligence agency that poisons people, and he was so nervous, being schooled by Putin like a 5-year-old. And from there, you saw this nervousness around, going through different layers to the point that now you see protests breaking out. Now, does that mean the majority of Russia doesn't support this? No, there's so much propaganda that from morning to night, this is all you hear. The Nazi stuff and Ukraine is evil and it's a puppet state of the United States and, all the garbage that they've been peddling for years. But there are a lot of people, there's a lot of connections between both because there are Russians who have, family who live in Ukraine, Ukrainians have family who live in Russia. And to see this happening, I mean, some are just really appalled. And I have a feeling the protests are going to grow because, I mean, the fact that they're coming out, risking their life after being specifically ordered that if you come out, that, and we're there, it's not just a regular arrest and you get a summons and go back out. There, you get your career blocked, you get, the state police on you, monitoring everything, your phones, your computer, your this. So, I mean, they're putting their lives at risk. And today, I mean, they arrested a woman with a baby. I mean, who arrests a baby? And they dragged her away. So, I mean, we're going to see, I think we're going to see more. And I think Putin definitely overstepped his, the line this time. Because I don't think he expected this united front. I think he expected, the usual deep concerns and whatnot.
Yeah, and appeasement. And there's no appeasing this guy. Now, I do want to ask, because, I'm going through and I'm listening to some of the voices here, the Fox Channel folks, the OANs, some of our political people, the one woman yesterday who ran a Senate campaign in Delaware, saying that she's more aligned with Putin than she is with Joe Biden. That Russia is a good Christian nation. That we're good Christian nationalists too. Are you surprised that in this country there are so many people that are Putin sympathizers and that would justify what he's doing based on religion?
I mean, that surprise wore off after Trump came into power, and I saw them excuse everything and defend Putin. So, no, I'm not surprised. I am more surprised that there are some Republicans who are actually the more moderate ones who are working with Democrats to do the sanctions, to make sure that, that Russia gets, the right penalties and the right measures are taken to go after Putin and the Kremlin. These people, look, I mean, they're crazy. That's all we have to say. And the thing is, this is the fringe, and we need to get our country back. They need to go away, and it's going to get a lot harder for them when with social media, with TV on it 24 hours. I mean, you're going to have, people dying. It's going to be a lot harder for them to excuse it. And, as far as Christian and whatnot, I mean, Ukrainians also have, right in the center, one of the most beautiful Orthodox churches. So, what's the difference between Putin's Orthodox Church and Ukraine's Orthodox Church,
Excellent point.
So, I mean, it's going to get harder. And that's it. And then you're going to have the few who are going to continue. But, I mean, they're being drowned out. Even J.D. Vance came out. Who cares what happens to Ukraine until someone advised him that he has a huge Ukrainian population in his thing. And he came out with a statement right after and yes, we are concerned. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you'll see the wind shifting, because Ukrainians in the United States, that is a very huge front, because in U.S., Ukrainians with some Russian emigres who are, like the Navalny people and the Belarusians and Polish, they all vote as one bloc. So you could just imagine how much of, the population that is and how much pressure can be put on Congress.
No, I grew up in Cleveland, so I know the state fairly well. In Cleveland, you had a huge Ukrainian population. You had Slavic Village, an enormous population there. Parma was all Polish. You went throughout the city and you had those pockets, which are gigantic voting blocks. And I don't know why you'd want to lose them, but Olga,
no. And better yet, even put out a statement saying, I apologize, or whatever his version of apology. I mean, is a Ukrainian going to read that and be like, okay, sure, I'll vote for you?
Crazy times. Olga, I appreciate you taking time for us. I hope you'll come back and talk with us again as this continues. Hopefully this is short. Hopefully some sense comes back to Putin and we undo some of this. But I'd love to have you come back and talk with us again.
Definitely. Thank you.
Good stuff. OlgaLautman.com, the website. Make sure you check out the work that she does there. She is our Russia and Ukraine expert. I'd love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1941. That was the day a general strike by workers against the Nazis took place in Amsterdam. The Nazis had begun the occupation of the Netherlands in the spring of 1940. The German occupiers implemented a series of increasingly repressive anti-Semitic laws. In response, some young Jewish men in the city formed self-defense groups. They clashed with the occupiers and local residents who supported the Nazis' policies. To make an example against Jewish resistance, on February 22nd, the Nazis rounded up more than 400 Jewish young men in Amsterdam. They were deported to a series of concentration camps where most were killed. The Communist Party in the city issued a call for workers to stand up against this anti-Semitism. Their call was to strike, strike, strike. Working groups across the city responded. The general strike began on this day in labor history, with public tram drivers leading the strike, causing public transportation to ground to a halt. Factories and department stores all stood silent. Students walked out of classrooms. The next day, the strike spread to other nearby towns and villages. The Germans' response was quick and harsh. It crushed the strike on its third day and leveled a severe blow to Dutch anti-Nazi resistance organizing. It's estimated that between 75 and 80% of the Netherlands' Jewish population perished in the Holocaust. In 1952, a large statue called the Dock Worker was commemorated in Amsterdam in memory of the workers' strike. Each year, a ceremony is held at the statue to recall when workers stood up together against hate and to renew the promise to never forget the victims of the Holocaust. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So remember the January 6th criminal who was carrying Nancy Pelosi's lectern around? Thought it would be a fun idea to carry it around the Capitol Rotunda. Hey, look what I got. Evidently sentenced to 75 days in prison. And I got to tell you, I still think that is ridiculous. 75 days? Are you kidding me? You know, that's what you give kids who do pranks. This was a serious attack on our country. And 75 days, that's it. Amazing. Another one of the January 6th criminals from my state of Pennsylvania. Annie Howell, her name. Evidently, she has been working with the January 6th committee for, well, almost from the beginning. For quite some time now. In fact, some of the stuff that she's saying, Eric Trump, sounds like trouble for you. Evidently, there was a meeting where a bunch of promises were made. If people would do, certain things, go back to their states and push for, the kind of, the kind of crazy we saw in Pennsylvania and in Arizona and elsewhere. She was called to this meeting and, basically promised, like jobs and, all kinds of favors and stuff. This could be trouble because it then this kind of stuff. And look, I believed this all along. I had heard, stories of this happening. This is the first time someone has come out and say, yes, there was a meeting with the Trump campaign. There was a meeting with Eric. This is what they wanted us to do. This is what, they promised us, all of these things that we could, get jobs and we can, get favors and, all of this stuff and, move up within the party, all of this stuff. And that they were surrounded by Congress people, by senators, by all of these folks. And, this could be a big deal. Now, don't get me wrong here. I still do not believe that he is going to go to jail. I still don't believe that he's going to be held accountable because it's not what we do. I can hope, and I want that to happen. But given our history, no, I don't see it. But the fact that she was invited to this, this invitation-only event where they did all of this stuff, and she's now telling the tale. And I got to wonder how many other people were getting this kind of VIP treatment. This, come on, do our criming for us, and we'll buy you dinner. It's kind of like a timeshare scam. And that is so Trumpian. The high pressure, have you ever gone to one of those timeshares where they, come spend a weekend at our place and win a TV or nonsense like that, and then they just hound you to sign up for it? That's how I imagine this advisor dinner going, to where they just hound these people. And look, these are people who wanted to anyway. But the fact that she's been working with them all that long, I got to imagine that there are many, many more out there to sing the praises, to keep themselves out of jail. Even the 75 days is a joke. But to be the one out there, singing like a bird. Wow. It is what it is. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any of the show, download the podcast at the website or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll take a quick break. Right back after this with Bob Ney. Stick around.
Nord Stream 2 will not, as I promised, will not move forward.
Germany agrees. Polls plug on Russia's critical gas pipeline. Fourth tropical cyclone in 4 weeks batters Madagascar. U.S. fracking industry is curtailing production to goose fossil fuel prices.
Even more?
Plus, Dakota Access Pipeline developer loses bid to block new environmental assessment.
All of those losers and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Cheap oil is a deterrent from tyrannical third world dictators from invading other countries. Could it be that Greta Thunberg and Leonardo DiCaprio actually might be to blame for what Vladimir Putin is doing?
No, it could not. And her name is Thunberg.
That's a take you will not hear anywhere else.
For good reason, Charlie Kirk, you dunderhead. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, normally we would think your lead would be in Russia and Germany today, but nope, climate change is moving us across the world.
Yes, it is. Compounding tragedy in Madagascar off the coast of eastern Africa. Madagascar was hit with the fourth tropical cyclone in just 4 weeks on Tuesday, intensifying an ongoing humanitarian crisis. The back-to-back cyclones have killed at least 200 and left hundreds of thousands homeless in one of the poorest countries in the world.
That's back-to-back-to-back-to-back cyclones.
Yes. The United Nations warns Madagascar is facing the world's first climate change famine caused directly by man-made global warming due to years of unrelenting drought. Here in the U.S., AP reports that in California, which is mired in its third year of severe drought, federal water managers said this week they can't deliver any water from reservoirs to farmers in the state's biggest agricultural region. That will force some to plant fewer crops in a region that supplies the bulk of the nation's fruits, nuts, and vegetables.
Maybe plant fewer almonds, which take up an inordinate amount of water.
Correct. In other news, fossil fuel prices were already spiking on global markets to their highest levels since 2014 due to rising demand and tight supplies. So it certainly didn't help when Russian President Vladimir Putin intensified aggressive actions toward neighboring Ukraine.
Well, it depends who you say it didn't help.
That, in turn, triggered the U.S. and Europe to initiate sanctions. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has indefinitely halted certification of the controversial $11 billion Nord Stream 2 methane gas pipeline from Russia. Potential additional EU actions could include banking restrictions impeding Russia's ability to export its oil and gas, a pillar of the Russian economy, that could further curtail global supply. Everyone is bracing for higher energy prices, especially Europe, which is dependent on Russia for about 40% of its oil and gas.
Maybe that was never a good idea.
Well, on Wednesday, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said that Europe has sufficient supplies to get through the winter, and she said Russia's actions have underscored the risk of relying on Russian fossil fuels. She said the EU will accelerate its shift to clean energy.
This crisis shows that Europe is still too dependent on Russian gas. We have to diversify our supplies. We will have to massively invest in renewable energy. That's where the future is, because this is a strategic investment in our energy independence.
President Biden on Wednesday also slapped sanctions on Russia's Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline and said the administration will take measures to mitigate the economic impact on Americans from higher fossil energy prices, which Republicans hope to make a political problem for Biden and congressional Democrats in the critical midterm elections in November.
Because of course they do. Hey, there may be war and tens of thousands of people killed, but it's great political news for us.
Higher prices mean higher profits for the oil and gas industry, but it's not just Russia's actions causing fossil fuel prices to jump. A new report by the American Prospect finds that after flooding the market for a decade, now the oil and gas fracking industry in the U.S. is restricting production intentionally to goose prices in order to return more cash to investors.
Naturally.
Finally, a sliver of good news. The U.S. Supreme Court has rejected an attempt by the owner of the controversial Dakota Access Pipeline to block a new environmental review. The pipeline is opposed by nearby Native American tribes because of the threat of a spill to their drinking water supply. Energy Transfer's pipeline has been operating without a permit while the new assessment is underway, which the company has previously said leaves the pipeline vulnerable to being shut down.
Our Supreme Court blocked the challenge?
Yeah.
Our packed and stolen Supreme Court?
Yep.
Are you okay, Supreme Court? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. This has been your Green News Report.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So like everyone spent the day watching what's going on in Ukraine and look, with the UN and with NATO and, just glued to the television, waiting for the next report or glued to social media to see the videos coming out of Ukraine and, just the tragedy that's going on right there. But one of the things that caught my attention was a story about India, and I've been waiting all day to talk to our good friend Bob Ney, former Ohio Congressman, political analyst. Bob is one of these guys who spent a lot of time in India. He's the guy I go to as my India expert. That's why we've asked him to come back on the program. Bob, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick.
So I'm looking at this story about India, who evidently is going to still be working with Putin. They're attempting to establish a rupee payment mechanism so that they can continue trade with Russia. Is this a big deal?
Well, I would call this, because India is very sympathetic to the United States. There's no question about that. But I would call this probably, India looking out after its survival ability, I guess. And they're working together on a new financial, type of system. Now, there was something that was, I think, maybe 4 or 5 years ago was talked about, and it's called BRIC.
Yep.
And with the BRIC, which was actually created a while back, it involved Russia, India, and China and Brazil. So that's been in place, for quite a while. Also, I think the fact that SWIFT, and I don't know if people have been talking about SWIFT today, but SWIFT is a financial mechanism created that has about 42 million some transactions, I think, in a day's period of time. And with that, we haven't been able to dismantle Russia from SWIFT because the allies won't. I mean, President Biden would like to. Our allies will not do it, so it stands. So I think you're going to see certain mechanisms such as, SWIFT, and also with the BRIC that's in place with India. There was a close relationship with India and in Russia, after the Soviet Union was dismantled. At one point in time, the Indian people were not particularly close to Russia. And I would tell you this from going to India as much. If we would beef up our outreach to India, I think we could become a better friend to India than it is with Russia. Yeah. I really do.
No, and that makes a lot of sense. But they're saying, this is basically what happened in 2014 as well. Is this is why Obama ended up in the situation that he was in. Why we didn't do more when the Russians took over Crimea. Is that a fair assessment?
Of why we didn't do more? I mean, I think we were bound at that time. It comes down to a lot of the same thing. Is what do you really do? Do you put troops in there? And I don't think obviously we can do that. We can do certain things, sanctions, but with the Crimea, it's the same thing. How much can the United States do on its own to say, okay, we're gonna go in and do this and do that? We have a whole conglomerate of countries out there that are either with us on certain things or not. And again, I can guarantee you, President Biden would like to have put the tightening screws on Russia with SWIFT. Which I think, Rick, if I remember right, is run out of Belgium. He would like to have done that financially, but, a lot of the rest of the world is not ready to do that at that time. So India, when we go back to it, it's in a diplomatic problem. It's got a decade-long tie with Russia, and its reliance on what? Military, equipment. I think Putin visited just this past maybe November, December, and he was quick to acknowledge a special partnership with them, and they're supplying some military equipment. So I think if we would beef up our end of it, we might be able to do something more with the Indians. Why is it important? Because we obviously do not have China, and India has 1.2 billion people.
Right.
So that should be, I think, a strategic move for us.
No, I completely agree. But the reason I bring it up is, all day long, all I kept hearing from the right and the Fox channel and all of those is that Biden's weak, he hasn't done enough. And then the Twitter people go, well, he hasn't done this and he hasn't done that. I'm going, you don't just flip switches and this stuff happens. We don't just get to dictate. You've got to deal with everybody in the international community and think about, all of the consequences that go along with it and all the repercussions here at home and abroad. There's a lot to this. It's a lot more difficult than just flipping a switch or pressing a button.
Right. And on this one, let's look at what Ted Cruz said. He's praising President Trump for the sanctions, or President Biden, and normally Ted Cruz is the President Trump guy, right? And what he said was, this is Ted Cruz of Texas. President Biden has now taken positive steps. He's done it, and I think it was Senator Young from Indiana did the same thing. And Trump doesn't want them to do that because now it's a Trump, because Biden is doing something, then Trump's got to be kind of friendly with Putin. He's got to take just the opposite course. And on this one, the president has done, what he can do. Look, we all know if the president put our troops on the ground in Ukraine, we all know the repercussions of that. It would be, if we go this by ourselves, the repercussions would be horrible. And
nobody is talking about that.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Nobody. So
right.
If someone says nobody's talking about that.
Right. Right.
But I did get the Fox line that well, this is all Biden's fault because he canceled the Keystone Pipeline and we're still buying gas from Russia. And look, there's an argument that by buying gas from Russia, even though you're talking about a company that's run by, I think the guy who's the CEO of it's a German guy. You still are funneling money to Russia that they are using. But that then becomes this is all a sham. Joe Biden's funding the whole thing because he won't pull us out of getting gas. It seems like a dumb argument to me.
Well, and the reason I bring up the troops, and you're bringing up the gas, and you're correct, is this. There are certain things we can do. The president has done what we can do. He's instituted sanctions. He's communicated with NATO. He's communicated with world leaders. He's getting them in on it. Europe, European Union sanctioning directly Putin. So the president's done that. The only other alternatives, we start to provide all of Europe's needs, which we're not going to do that with our resources, or we put troops on the ground, and we're not going to do that either. So there's nothing left to pick at the president except what they can say, well, he's not done enough. There's nothing left. No. He's done what he can do. He can't dismantle SWIFT. He can't dismantle the Russian financial, arrangements through SWIFT because the rest of the world is not going to go along with it. And so we are where we can be at this particular time.
Excellent point. So what is, there's a lot of speculation about, why now, why is Putin doing this? Do you see an end game here? I mean, because I don't see how this becomes something that Russia can manage. Ukraine is an extremely large country, some 43 million people, 45 million people. I don't know how you come in and take over and hold that and not have constant conflict.
Well, a lot of people that have been doing the media and shows that I've called into, and they're calling in from D.C., and I'm going to disagree with them. They are saying that he's the Kim Jong-un. He's lost it. Putin's mentally lost it. He's isolated. I completely disagree. completely with some of my colleagues that are, reporting out of D.C., Rick, because he knows what he's doing. He hasn't just made super big bad mistakes. A lot of this is done on purpose, and I think he wants to, try to jab at the United States that, you can't do any more on this, sort of that. But that's a minor thing. I think he wants to reshape himself, put himself in the power seat in European politics, and he wants to disrupt the Ukraine. I don't believe by any stretch of the imagination, Rick, that he is going to go in to the capital of the Ukraine and occupy it, and we will see him in there with his troops for the next 3 years. I think he disrupts, starts to try to do some diplomatic efforts with the Ukraine itself, but he disrupts them, so he gets what he wants. I think he has that as an end game.
So what you're arguing is he keeps boogering stuff up. The economy tanks. They go through because they're already talking about stagflation and the economy in shambles. That happens to eventually down the road, the people just kind of give up because they're worn down,
right?
And as opposed to being taken over. Look
at Belarus. I mean, neighboring Belarus. They are on bended knee to the Soviet Union, yet they're Belarus. And I think what he's going to do with Ukraine is not occupy it. They learned their Afghanistan lesson, years back. They're not going to occupy it. I think they're going to cause havoc. They're going to put it in a position where it finally says, okay, let's start to talk. And he might, create a sort of Moscow-backed police type of force. But I don't think he's going to keep troops in there. He'll get what he wants. And probably the Ukraine will be in such a battered position, it may say, well, we're going to take our time on NATO. We're going to take our time about thinking about going into NATO. And that's what I think. It becomes a non-willing satellite of Russia.
Interesting. What do you think of the threats to Finland and Sweden? If they want to be in NATO, there will be military consequences.
Yeah, I mean, this now has become. Now, I think that becomes the absurd. It's one thing, for threats for bordering countries that are, directly affected or have had long history, or the eastern region, for example, of the Ukraine, which speaks, Russian. There's one thing. I think to take threats out beyond that is absolutely. Then I think that's out of touch.
Yeah, I it's one of those things where I just said, this is the kind of statement to get people, focused in a different direction. It was a deflection. It was a distraction. Mm-hmm. To get, like you said, to think he's unhinged.
Oh yeah, it's a different. That's a whole different issue, and it's not something that he has any form of control over. But he's sort of doing like Trump would do, make outrageous statements. It's got the whole world, talking about it.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, maybe he's taking some pointers from his buddy. Before we move on, I want to get your thoughts on Zelensky. I got to tell you, I'm impressed by this guy. To be honest, and look, I don't know much about what he's done there, but the fact that he stood up to Trump during that perfect phone call, and he's stood up now, hasn't fled the country. I mean, this was a guy who was a comedian. And now stood and looked in the eye of two of the most powerful people on the planet and stood his ground. I'm kind of impressed by that.
Well, I am too. Obviously, Poroshenko, the previous president, got a little bit of publicity. He was in the street with a gun or something, and he gets publicity. If you look at his history, it was absolutely bizarre, top to bottom. And as a result of being a bizarre president, which he was, and all the questions that happened around him, in comes Zelensky, and he becomes, now the number one target of Russia. And I think he's handled himself quite well. I don't know if, we'll take him out of there and bring him here. I don't know what's going to happen on that.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, I thought he has handled things quite well, especially, everybody said, well, he's a comedian, but I think he has. He was getting a lot of flack because he said he would do something to sort of mediate the rebels to the Ukraine, who are Ukrainians but tend to be pro-Soviet Union, and he was getting some heat for that. But then, of course, with the invasion, I mean, that's not even an issue now. It's how he's trying to still stand up for his country. I thought he's done quite well in obviously an extremely heated position, and I think a lot of people would have already taken a plane out of the country.
No, absolutely. And in those 13 guys on the island, or 13 soldiers on the island, there were women in there as well. I don't want to gloss over that. The fact that they stood their ground and no, we're not surrendering. You go blank yourself. Even though they got annihilated, how do you not respect that?
Right, exactly.
You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Bob Ney. Bob's a former Ohio congressman, political analyst. If you've got a thought, question, comment, something you want to ask Bob, give us a yell, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. If you're just joining us, make sure you download the podcast so you never miss a minute. Now, let's move it back here stateside. Supreme Court weighed in on D.C. statehood. Will D.C. ever become a state?
Well, I don't know it will in my lifetime. I am just not sure that it's out there that it will become a state. Of course, the Supreme Court has made a decision basically saying whether giving it to the Congress, that it is up to the Congress. It's not an automatic thing, but it's up to the Congress whether they want to do it. And I mean, I hate to say it'll never happen because you don't know. But when I was there, it was debated, up and down, and then it kind of would go away, and then it would, come back along, and we would work with Congresswoman Norton, on issues because we still tried to obviously, help her on some issues. But the Supreme Court, basically said that D.C. is not, constitutionally entitled to voting representation in Congress. So, it's going to be up to the Congress to do it. I don't know, Rick, that, again, I think I can probably safely say it probably isn't going to happen in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
I never want to say never, but.
So what would be the process if D.C. were to be given statehood, or the ability to have a voting member of Congress?
Well, what happens now is we have the delegates that are given an office.
Right.
They're given the same budget as any other member of Congress.
They just don't get a vote.
Obviously, to the Congresswoman. We did that, but as I understand it, in order to be admitted as a state, they have to be go within. On this case, they could go within the jurisdiction of another state. So they could go to Maryland or Virginia, as I understand it. That could happen.
Oh, so they couldn't be their own state?
Well, I don't know. If they wanted to be their own state, then they would have to go through the regular procedures for adding states to the union, and that procedure, obviously, and we've talked about it with Puerto Rico, for example. You've got a whole procedure, and then Congress would pass a federal law. And then there's a constitutional governing of how they're admitted. Then they have to go into the union, and then there has to be, of course, the votes from, I think, the rest of the states to bring them into statehood. But as I was told years ago, and I could be completely wrong on this, but I was told years ago if the D.C. potentially could be taken into the state of Maryland or into the state of Virginia. It might be constitutionally challenged by if the Congress did that, but that was one thing that was at least talked about when I was there.
Yeah, because there's no way. I'll say there's no way it becomes a state, because there's no way the Republicans are going to allow them to get 2 senators. That is never going to happen. Because those are 2 Democratic senators for forever. Then
right,
never going to happen. But I can see it possibly at some point down the road being absorbed into another state.
They could be, because you can't form a new state within the jurisdiction of another state. You can't combine them, but I think you could place the district into another state, or take it down the middle, put part in Virginia and part in Maryland. I mean, potentially, I guess you could do that.
Yeah,
but
that'd be kind of
entity, I don't see that.
That'd be kind of tricky.
Soon.
Finally, I wanted to get your thoughts on the Supreme Court nominee. The president has come out today over the objections of a number of Republicans who think it's too soon, it's inappropriate because of what's going on in Ukraine, or they just don't like this woman. I'm curious your thoughts on her.
I was starting to say to myself, President Biden, why are you taking so long? I thought they should have made the appointment a couple of weeks ago just to get it going, okay? Yep. But I understand they wanted to vet it, but I also predicted wrong today. I thought it was going to be Judge Michelle Childs, who I thought was an extremely good choice, and that for a lot of political reasons, too. She would have had Lindsey Graham and also Congressman Clyburn. But let me say this, that I think that the choice that they have made, Judge Jackson, is fantastic. I mean, she's not only graduated twice, but also with honors from Harvard. The other thing is she actually has not weighed in on a lot of the, I'll call them the social cases, of abortion or guns, et cetera. She hasn't weighed in on that. She has been appointed to the second most powerful position as a judge with the appeals in the District of Columbia. She's done that. I think she's got a great track record. Unless there's something out there that we don't know, I think that the Republicans had better be extremely careful about, saying, well, she's too far to the left. We don't know particularly what she particularly is on some social issues. Let me just say this, too. There was a quote by Senator Grassley, Republican, right? And when he was talking, and this is the most fascinating, this issue kills me here. He was talking and praising her publicly, Senator Grassley, when it came to reforming the correction system, all right? Sentencing system.
Right.
Now, who advanced the changes in the sentencing system in the United States and the correction system? Donald Trump, because of his son-in-law's father who was incarcerated.
Yeah.
That was a bright spot that happened in the Trump administration. So now are Republicans going to criticize her? Grassley has praised her. It was their president. They voted for it.
Yeah, and
I thought that was fascinating.
And Paul Ryan has come out in support of her as well.
Sure.
Evidently, they're related in some way through marriage, and he's got nothing but good things to say about her. So I guess the big question is, will there be one Republican to vote for her?
Yes. I'm going to predict yes.
You do think so?
Yes.
Okay, so your fear, you don't share the same fear that I do, that Joe Manchin torpedoes the whole thing.
No.
We get into the fall with no confirmation, and the Democrats lose the Senate, and Biden loses the Supreme Court.
I predict Manchin goes along with it, and I'm going to predict a Republican or some Republican votes.
All right. Okay.
That's my prediction today.
All right.
She is a good candidate.
We'll see. That is the hope, and we'll find out what happens. But Bob, as always, I appreciate the time.
Okay.
Thanks so much for
it.
Good stuff. Our good friend Bob Ney. No, I hope he's right. And this is one of these things. She did get 3 Republican votes the last time around. Like I said earlier, Lindsey Graham, Susan Collins, and Murkowski. Graham has already come out and said no, because I think, as Bob pointed out, he wanted Michelle Childs, who I did not want. Some troubling labor stuff for me, and she wasn't at the top of my list. This woman was, because of a lot of things that he said. That there isn't that definitive record. So you're not going to give people the chance to take shots. But we'll see. We'll see where it goes. I think it was a good choice. We'll see how this confirmation process goes along. Will Manchin go along? I'm hoping. I'm hoping it goes smoothly. We get someone else on the Supreme Court. And that, well, hopefully get us back to somewhere near sanity down the road. Look, it's a sideways choice. The court is not the complexity of the court not going to change. It's going to be a 6-3 conservative, extreme corporatist court. It is what it is, but this was a good choice. My thoughts. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, going to talk a little bit more about what's going on in Ukraine. Rick Wilson from Lincoln Project going to be here to share some thoughts. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1941. That was the day a general strike by workers against the Nazis took place in Amsterdam. The Nazis had begun the occupation of the Netherlands in the spring of 1940. The German occupiers implemented a series of increasingly repressive anti-Semitic laws. In response, some young Jewish men in the city formed self-defense groups. They clashed with the occupiers and local residents who supported the Nazis' policies. To make an example against Jewish resistance, on February 22nd, the Nazis rounded up more than 400 Jewish young men in Amsterdam. They were deported to a series of concentration camps where most were killed. The Communist Party in the city issued a call for workers to stand up against this anti-Semitism. Their call was to strike, strike, strike. Working groups across the city responded. The general strike began on this day in labor history, with public tram drivers leading the strike, causing public transportation to ground to a halt. Factories and department stores all stood silent. Students walked out of classrooms. The next day, the strike spread to other nearby towns and villages. The Germans' response was quick and harsh. It crushed the strike on its third day and leveled a severe blow to Dutch anti-Nazi resistance organizing. It's estimated that between 75 and 80% of the Netherlands' Jewish population perished in the Holocaust. In 1952, a large statue called the Dock Worker was commemorated in Amsterdam in memory of the workers' strike. Each year, a ceremony is held at the statue to recall when workers stood up together against hate and to renew the promise to never forget the victims of the Holocaust. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
In 1972, I was part of a nationwide campaign that came close to getting the U.S. Senate to reject Earl Butz, Richard Nixon's choice for Secretary of Agriculture. A coalition of grassroots farmers, consumers, and public interest organizations teamed up with progressive senators to undertake the almost impossible challenge of defeating the cabinet nominee. The 51 to 44 Senate vote was so close because we were able to expose Butz as Bud Ugly. We brought the abusive power of corporate agribusiness into the public consciousness for the first time. We had won a moral victory, but it turned out to be a curse and a blessing. First, the curse. Butz had risen to prominence in the world of agriculture by devoting himself to the corporate takeover of the global food economy. He openly promoted the preeminence of middlemen food manufacturers over family farmers. Agriculture is no longer a way of life, he barked. It's a business. He instructed farmers to get big or get out, and proceeded to shove tens of thousands of them out by promoting an export-based, corporate-run food economy. Adapt, he warned, or die. The ruination of farms and rural communities, Butz added, releases people to do something useful in our society. This is Jim Hightower saying, the curse of Butz, however, spun off a blessing. Small farmers and food artisans practically threw up at the resulting Twinkie-ization of America's food. They were sickened that nature's own contribution to human culture was being turned into another plasticized product of corporate profiteers. They threw themselves into creating and sustaining a viable alternative, linking locally with consumers, environmentalists, community activists, marketers, and others. The Good Food Rebellion has since sprouted, spread, and blossomed from coast to coast. To find farmers markets and other expressions of this movement right where you live, go to localharvest.org.
Hightower's commentary is brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as I said earlier today, if this claim is true, if this is accurate, that 3,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in just 36 hours, that's an enormous number. Now, that's what the Financial Times is reporting. Who knows? But that is an enormous number considering we spent 20 years in Iraq and 4,400 soldiers were killed. And look, that is an enormous number. But in 36 hours, Wow. Here to share some thoughts on what's going on in Ukraine as the world seems to be, well, where we are. I've asked Rick Wilson to come talk with us. Rick is the co-founder of the Lincoln Project, their website, lincolnproject.us. Rick, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, glad to be with you again.
So I'm looking at this number. That would be an enormous number. 3,000 soldiers killed in just 36 hours.
Yeah, and there's a story breaking right now that the Ukrainians have downed an IL-76 troop transport, which could have had up to 300 more on board. This is not going the way Putin expected. They still may push into Kyiv. They still may win this short term, but they're paying an enormous cost in blood right now, as they should, frankly, for attempting to invade a democratic country. They're engaged in a degree of criminality and cruelty that is almost unprecedented in the modern era. And, you know, if that number is as high as we think it is, you know, there's a point where even Vladimir Putin's iron control over Russia starts to slip. The combination of the sanctions that the Biden administration and the EU nations have been imposing, the military costs in the war, and the fact that the Russian model of battle here hasn't worked out like they thought it would. They believed they were going to sweep in, have a traditional Russian style combined. This is way back to my days of working for the Defense Department. They thought they would send in this massive airstrike, massive artillery fire support, and then a motor rifle division and a tank division into each of these big lines of attack, and that Ukraine would fall. They were mistaken.
No, and you look at some of the stories, and the differences from your days back then till now is everyone's got a cell phone. Everyone is recording war crimes as they're happening.
That's right.
We're seeing real time exactly what's going on. So the propaganda machine not working, although here in this country, our propaganda machine working overtime. And I want to get to some of that. But I guess today also the Russians vetoed a measure at the Security Council. I know nobody's surprised by that, but coming out of the UN Security Council, the fact that China abstained and India stayed out of it, that's a pretty big deal, isn't it?
I think the biggest part of that story, Rick, is that China abstained. That is something that for Russia, they've been really playing hard to get China on board, to get them on side. And if they are not going to back the Russian play here, I think it makes it much more problematic. And I don't think we expected that it was going to turn out that way, but it seemingly has.
And also today, as I understand, for the first time in NATO's history, they have activated the NATO response force, which has never happened before, which I guess shows just how historic this moment is and how dangerous this moment is.
That is correct. And one thing that the president has been abundantly clear about is that we are fully in support of NATO, unlike Trump, who tried to turn NATO into a vending machine where we would put in a certain amount of money and they would then pay for our services. Joe Biden has said that Article 5 of the NATO Treaty and the NATO Treaty itself and NATO territory is sacrosanct. We are going to 100% defend NATO territory. That doesn't mean we're going to put boots on the ground in Ukraine, because frankly, I think the Ukrainians are doing a stellar job right now. But we're going to make sure that Vladimir Putin doesn't think he can expand back into the Baltics or Poland. You see Finland and Sweden today asking to join NATO. And, you know, NATO is an alliance that in its history has never attacked another country.
Right.
It has stood as a bastion of stability and protection. It works. And I think there's a possibility here, Rick, that this turns out and blows back on Putin by producing a Western Europe that is less corrupted by Russian money and is more allied with a strong NATO.
Which is why I think it was interesting that the Russians came out and said that if Finland or Sweden decides that they want to think about NATO, that things could happen to them as well. And I'm going, can you really want to be fighting that multiple front kind of war in this moment, especially as you pointed out, things aren't going well on the one front. Right.
And I will say this, you know, as a history nerd, the last time the Russians invaded Finland before World War II, the Finns killed about 100,000 of them. They are the most fierce and deadly fighters in Europe by reputation. Do not screw with the Finns. They will leave. They will stack you up like cordwood. And while no one alive today was involved in that, that should be a memory of those of their determination not to be rolled over. I spoke to people today in Germany, in Lithuania, in Poland, and Italy, all folks that I've known in those countries, either in politics or in the defense world, and they are all absolutely unified that this is not going to stand. They're not going to let Europe get rolled over. We're not going to let a new Iron Curtain fall at the hands of Vladimir Putin.
So let's get back to what's going on here, because, obviously, we don't have much control over there. But here at home, are you surprised by the right-wing propaganda, by the Putin apologists, by the Fox Newses, the AONs, and a lot of the people who are falling for the rhetoric that they're throwing out? First and foremost, being that this is all Joe Biden's fault. He's still buying gas from the Russians. He's funding all of this. I'm curious your thought on that.
Yeah, look, these are people who watched Donald Trump for 4 years, actually for 5 years. They watched Donald Trump kiss Vladimir Putin's ass. And there's a reason Putin didn't invade Ukraine when Trump was president. It's not the reason they think. It's not because Trump was strong or unpredictable or any of that other garbage. They didn't invade Ukraine because Trump was giving them what they wanted. He was breaking NATO apart. He had promised to leave the NATO treaty in the second term. He had broken up a deal that would have helped Ukraine protect itself by saying, do me a favor first and conduct a bogus investigation of Joe Biden. All of these things combined should tell you that what we're seeing in Joe Biden right now is a president who is in the tradition of Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, people who got it, where they may have disagreed on all kinds of policy things, but they agreed on the fact that you shouldn't have an authoritarian government that rolls over other countries in Europe. It is. I think the hypocrisy of it on the Republican side right now is astounding, and I think that the strength that Biden is showing right now. And look, could he do some things I want differently? Yeah, sure, a few things, but they are moving swiftly. They are taking strong action. They are doing things that are hurting the Russian oligarch class and Putin directly. And I think that's damn smart politics.
I'm right there with you. But, all day today, all I heard is the Fox News thing is, he's still buying their gas. And you go, yeah, because you don't want $6 gallon gas right now. You strategically hurt them where you can. You cripple them where it's most effective. And then down the road, if you need to go there, you go there as well. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're with Rick Wilson. He's the co-founder of the Lincoln Project, their website, lincolnproject.us. If you're just joining us, make sure you download the podcast so you never miss a second of the program. Now, what's interesting to me also is, the talk of, there are Nazis everywhere in Ukraine. Obama brought in Nazis. And I'm sitting there going, really? Where's this coming from? You find out it's coming from the cable news folks who are spewing this. Right. Are there Obama Nazis in Ukraine?
There are no Nazis in Ukraine. But the ironic thing is, if Republicans discovered there were Nazis in Ukraine, and they'd be kind of conflicted because they would be the only Nazis they don't love. Because right now those guys are a part of their constituency. The extremists and the far right, Proud Boys and the Patriot Front and the Boogaloos and all this other garbage parade. They're now an essential part of the Republican base coalition. They're good people on both sides, but the ironic thing here is this is classic Russian propaganda. And somehow they leave off the one big key fact that the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, is Jewish. So somehow they're missing that kind of big point in the thing. But it's just trash propaganda from the Russians and Fox. But I repeat myself.
Yeah. Now you brought up Zelensky, and I got to tell you, I'm in awe of this guy. I mean, he could flee, he could do what they've done in the past, but he has stood up. He said, nope, we're going to stay, we're going to fight. Along with the mayor of Kiev, the former boxer Klitschko.
Klitschko, yeah. Klitschko was out there with a big, carrying a big PKM machine gun today, and I'm like, he's still got that upper body strength. He can rock that.
No, but this is one of those things where you go, these are people who you don't want to mess around with, and there's part of me that doesn't doubt that first number. But now I'm looking at some of the people, the spokespeople here. First, you had Tommy Tuberville come out yesterday, whatever the hell statement that was, and now you got Charlie Weiss, another college football coach, coming out with another stupid statement about socialism. How is it that these guys spend so many years in and around colleges and know so little about what's going on and what the terms mean?
There is a joke today earlier that calling Tommy Tuberville stupid is an insult to stupid people. That is a guy who, it's either the most tenditious BS of somebody who absolutely knows he's lying, or somebody who is that dumb.
I'm going that dumb.
I gotta say it's probably that dumb.
Yeah. I'm going that dumb. And that's a sad thing, because this is someone sitting in the U.S. Senate. This is someone who is obstructing and pointing the finger at the president in a position of some authority. And that's what's most frustrating to me, Rick. You look at these people that are supposed to be our representatives, our quote unquote leaders, and how divided in this moment. And you're probably right about my age, maybe a little bit older. I grew up during the Cold War. I could have never imagined in this moment that you would hear people on television saying, I have more in common with Vladimir Putin than I have with the president of the United States. I can't imagine having a governor saying, hey, I backed a white supremacist instead of a Democrat. We're just in such weird times.
It really is. We've reached the point where the irreality of our situation has been brought home, I think, in a strange way, in a very odd way, by a war, where we have had a sudden moment of clarity that for a lot of Republicans who do not side with Putin, they're watching leaders in their party and they're watching the network that defines their party praise a post-communist ex-KGB officer who is the dictator of Russia invading a peaceful, democratic, pro-American nation. And they're supporting it. And so I think this is going to end up having two big consequences. There will be a further erosion inside the GOP of people who are comfortable with the Trumpist version of pro-Putinism and pro-authoritarianism. There will also be, I think, a moment where Joe Biden, there's a way for Joe Biden where he comes out of this thing looking like a strong international leader. And if that ends up being the case, we could see a very different sort of political landscape. Because look, what is the fundamental underpinning of all Republican argumentation about national security? We're the tough guys.
Yep.
We're the badasses. We're strong. Democrats are weak. Well, right now they are the weak side. They are the side that is siding with the Putin regime and siding with the invasion and laughing it off and shrugging it off and saying, oh, it's not as bad as anything that, and they are truly not, I think, in a position where they understand just how bad this is for them, both as politically and as a party.
So let me ask you this then, because there's part of me that goes, we've become such a society that whatever the other team is for, we have to be against. Do you think that plays into this, or as I believe, I actually truly believe this is who the Republicans are? They are the party of white supremacy. They are the party of Christian nationalism and all of the things that the homophobia and misogyny and all of those things. But there's part of me that goes, some of it is the other team's for something, I got to be against it, and the reflux is immediate. I have to be against it.
It is, and the reflexive oppositional defiant disorder is most strongly marked inside the GOP today, where Joe Biden could come out tomorrow and say, hey, by the way, we've discovered a cure for cancer, and Republicans would say either, no, you haven't, it's a lie, or we're not taking your evil anti-cancer medicine because of something.
Yeah.
That reflexive, middle finger extension on anything, I think it's a danger to the country. I think it's a danger to the fabric of this nation in a fundamental way. And look, Democrats, especially a lot of progressives, God bless them, they have the same kind of reflexive thing.
Yep.
Where they have just they can't accept even a statement of goodwill. I mean, I saw Mitt Romney getting blasted yesterday, saying, we got to stand up against Russia for Ukraine, and people were mad at him on the progressives. I'm like, for God's sakes, he's on the side of the angels right now. He doesn't have to be perfect. You guys aren't getting married. It's like staying at an Airbnb. You need to stay there for a little while. You don't need to move in or get married. So.
No, but here's the thing, and this is where the interesting part of it is, to your point, you were a former Republican, a Reagan guy, I'm sure. How did that party go from the party
Reagan's 84 election was my first vote I ever cast.
Yeah, how do you go from Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall to the leader of Russia as a genius and savvy? How does that happen in my lifetime?
That's why I'm not a Republican anymore. The party abandoned everything it allegedly meant. And the irony of this whole thing was there are very few of us who, I mean, look, I've been opposed to Trump now, and I feel so old saying this, for 7 years. I came out against Trump in 2015, which I feel like it's dog years. I feel like that's like 100 years ago. But so few of the Republicans that I was friends with for years and worked with and elected and helped and friends and clients and everything else, colleagues, they have to close their eyes and pretend that it's normal and pretend that nothing's changed or pretend that Trump was a 5-minute aberration and the rest of the world could go back to normal now. It's not. The whole party changed. Everything changed. They stopped believing in anything. Whether you believed in limited government or free markets or individual liberty or the Constitution, or I was never a social conservative, but if you believe in any of the social conservative stuff, all of that's out the window now. It's all about power, control, and the retention of power and control, and basically a willingness to burn down anything that gets in the way of Trump's lies.
Yeah, I mean, you've gone from Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall to at CPAC, Trump people handing out Russian flags with Trump's name on it. Yeah. How do you get there? And is there hope?
It's impossible to imagine.
I guess the last question I've got, looking at what's going on down at CPAC, which is just turned into complete and total crazy pack. Is there any hope for that party? Is there any hope? Because look, I've got people that I know who vote for Republicans, and I've always thought of them as good, decent people who have good, sane religious values and all of that stuff. But they're still pulling that lever. Is there any hope for them?
There is some hope for them, Rick. I mean, and in 2020 we targeted a group of 3 to 8% of Republicans in these states to swing them over for Biden. We were successful in a number of places to pull that number, 3 to 8% over. We think that this number is expanding rather than contracting because January 6th and the increasing stuff in a lot of suburban areas that drives even moderate Republicans away from the party. Like you've got in Texas, they're snitching on women who get abortions. They're paying people to spy on women who get abortions. And whether or not you agree with abortion at all, you don't need to have people spying on women getting medical procedures. That's not a country you should want to live in. And a lot of voters don't want to live in it. And now you're seeing this cruelty happening in Florida with like the Don't Say Gay bill, where a teacher can be fined and penalized if they don't report a child who tells them they're gay to the parents. Same thing in Texas, where the governor is wants the schools and school counselors and social workers to report trans children. I think that's a thing that's going to continue to drive a wedge between more moderate, socially moderate Republicans and the rest of the party. And you will eventually reach a critical mass where in deep red areas and deep red states, you may be successful, but it's going to be harder and harder to win over votes of educated and suburban and affluent voters. And it's going to trickle down eventually to folks who just don't want to be in a party that's based on cruelty.
I sure hope you're right. I hope there's a way for my Republican voting friends to come back to somewhere near the sane line. because it would sure be nice to be in the same stadium again. I'm not I don't believe we'll all be on the same field, but at least in the same arena. But Rick, I appreciate you taking time for us. Great talking
Hey, Rick,
with you.
anytime, brother. Love being on with you. Hope you have a great weekend. I'll talk to you guys again soon.
You as well, our good friend Rick Wilson. Make sure you check out the work that they do at the Lincoln Project, lincolnproject.us. We'll get links out on social media, how you can do that. You also follow them at Project Lincoln on Twitter. Good stuff right there. But, the scary part in all this, and, I gotta go back to, the woman yesterday who ran for Senate in Delaware, who, came out and, honestly said the quiet part out loud.
Here's the deal also, Russia is a Christian nationalist nation. They're actually Orthodox Christian and Russian Orthodox. So, I actually support Putin's right to protect his people and always put his people first, but also protect their Christian values. I identify more with with Putin's Christian values than I do with Joe Biden. So, there is that. There is that there. Christian nationalist countries also are a threat to the global regime, like the Luciferian regime. It wants to mash everything together, but Putin takes care of his people. He looks out for his people. I watched as he deported, they literally walked them through the streets, the criminal illegals who were coming into their country. Yeah. They walked them out and they escorted them out and they said, get out. I can respect that. I can respect that, and I can respect the fact that Putin does everything he can to protect his people.
Yeah, except for the potentially 3,000 soldiers who died in the last 36 hours for his war crime. But she identifies more with Vlad. And what's interesting to me, and again, these are people who talk to me about freedom. They talk about freedom of speech, freedom of they got their guns, except none of that stuff exists over there. And this is where I come back to Tommy Tuberville. I come back to Charlie Weiss. I come back to all these people who, I don't know where their mind is. They are stuck in this mindset that Russia is still a communist country. That we don't want to be like communist or socialism or ist. Or, we know something. So you don't want to be that. Yeah. So that. I mean, how jumbled and insane the messaging. And look, they're all over the map. There's no coordination here. The Fox News people have all of their minions, reading from their hymnal, which is, Joe Biden didn't block the gas. Well, understand, when you're dealing with a coalition of countries that need that energy to keep their houses warm, and when you're talking about people here, that you take that into consideration. And what you target first, your first targets are going after what is going to harm and hurt the wealthy. Hit them first. Make those oligarchs squeal until they turn on Putin. And look, if things are going as badly as it sounds like they are, and I hope Rick is right, I'm hoping that things is going really badly for Putin. There's a moment where, his head could be on the platter as well. Because the wealthy don't like to lose. The wealthy don't like to spend money needlessly. The wealthy don't like to have their lives in any bit of chaos. They want to keep stealing and robbing. And like we talked about yesterday, what's going on, and the sales job that Putin gave, the sales job that he gave was all about, hey, we can go in there, we'll take it over, it'll be a weekend, no problem, and we can rob and pillage. We can have it all. And there's nothing that the world's going to do about it. Except here's the thing. Joe Biden did, and good on Joe Biden. So for all those people beating up on Joe Biden today, as those 13 guys on Snake Island said before the Russian warship killed them all, blank you. Good on them. If you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com is where you get the podcast, the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. Also, grab the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, from iHeart to iTunes, Stitcher to Podbean, and everywhere in between. You can get it there. Also, love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to